Welcome, boys and girls. Christine here with a discussion about Immortal Empires, the map of the game. Because it's become very clear to me, especially with mods like the Old World mod by Chaos Robbie and Old World Refit has been released more recently, that one of the big problems of the game is not really the design of characters or lords or races, but specifically the map in itself is causing problems. And even things like changing the location of certain characters like in Refit, or expanding the map like in Immortal Empires Extended or Old World, can improve the campaign experience in some very substantial ways. And this brings me to the core of the problem with Immortal Empires, how it was designed. Because Immortal Empires was not a great project by Creative Assembly. What happened is that in early 2022, Creative Assembly released Realms of Chaos, and they got an enormous amount of backlash over it. People did not like it. And so, since players were demanding the release of a big map consolidating all the characters, CA rushed it. That's how you get in the situation where you end up having an Immortal Empires beta until Forge of the Chaos Dwarves. But then, of course, after that, Creative Assembly didn't really do much with it, unfortunately. To give you some ideas, though, Forge of the Chaos Dwarves was an update that actually changed the entire Darklands in terms of provinces, in terms of various terrain features. It did vastly improve the campaign experience for pretty much any legendary lord that has to deal with this situation. And we're not just talking Chaos Dwarves, we're talking about Tretch, we're talking about Imric, we're talking about Grimgore. It ended up being a far better campaign experience. Of course, CA did do some improvements for Kislev, Witch House of Change, but Witch House of Change, CA really just wanted to get away with doing far less for the same price as a race pack. And that's, by the way, the thing about Shadows of Change. Forge of Chaos Dwarves was a good DLC because it actually, while more expensive, it did quite a few things. Shadows of Change was bad DLC and still is a bad DLC because it did far less. Yes, it did add some provincial capitals. Yes, it did add some changes. But it was never enough to fix the problems of Kislev. And that's really what CA should do. We'll talk about the cost situation in just a bit, but let me just go over some of the critical problems. For starters, we have the Great Bastion of Cathay. It sucks. And it sucked since Realms of Chaos. I understand the idea of having various invasions and having Cathay play defensive, but this is just a huge money sink that either is an annoyance that consumes your time when you could be spending that time doing more interesting stuff in the campaign, or is something that blows up in your face. It is not an interesting experience, never was, between the rogue armies that spawn as well as the ridiculous number of Norskins, Warriors of Chaos, and Chaos Dwarves that will be coming over the Great Bastion. It just ends up siege after siege after siege, or you fighting in bad climate. And that's as Cathay. Never mind the interactions, if you're playing Loki or Snitch, etc. Not a good system, not a good area. It's also the fact that there's nothing beyond it, just a province with huge distances between the settlements, and it's not even great for either Zaytan or Village to be dealing with these kind of things. That's actually something that hurts both their campaigns. The rest of Cathay is pretty good, except the jungle, because jungle is not an especially great part of the campaign since it slows you down because CA has some weird thought processes about that. But that's just one of the areas. Another critical area is, of course, going to be the Southlands, Lustria. You know, we can talk about a jungle, but part of it is the problem with Kairos. Yes, Kairos is an annoyance, a nuisance, because he steals settlements, so you can't just ignore him and let you invade him. He'll also literally teleport to attack you, if you do so. But to attack him is, again, a nuisance. So that is not a great dynamic to have here. And then you add the jungle situation as well. And that problem, by the way, the entire jungle in the Southlands doesn't, again, just affect the jungle campaigns. It doesn't just affect Teclis or Krokar or Warzak. It affects everyone in this entire campaign area is going to have to contend at one point or another with Kairos and his shenanigans, and that means paying him a visit. And it's better as someone like Forik, but you understand the point. There are some good campaign areas, the Badlands to a degree, emphasis, the Darklands, of course, parts of the Empire, but then we look at Kislev. Kislev with its wonderful cities that are not really wonderful, like only 100 income from Kislev City, or 200 from Prague, just early on. Sure, there is money to be made, but these cities are more useful for the landmark situation as well as for recruitment. But their growth is slower, their economic potential is limited, and yes, it does affect every campaign here as well, because say you're playing Fraught, you don't really want to take over these cities unless you have the food to spend to make them tier 5. If you don't have the food to spend, they're just a waste of time. You're better off selling them off. But trusting the AI to do things, even the AI gets hurt by it. So you get these vulnerable critical points, even playing as someone else. Even as the Dark Fortress, which Prague is, it sucks. Suffice to say, like, Prague is one of the worst Dark Fortresses in the game. Now, you can argue about the Brass Keep, but the thing about Brass Keep, at least it starts as a tier 2 settlement, and it's fairly safe, and also Festus has a significant amount of growth. See, that's the thing, it can work in certain situations. But yeah, those are some of the big trouble spots. So we think about the Great Bastion, we think about Kislev, we think about the jungles, we think about the distance between Ulthuan and Nagron, and then Ulthuan and Bretonnia. And another issue is Bretonnia itself. Like, Bretonnia is supposed to have more growth in its elements to make up for the fact that Bretonian provinces have only 2 regions. But this is bad, not just for Bretonnia, it's also bad for everyone else. In fact, the only legendary lord that has a good time with Bretonnia is Karl Franz, because he cheats with growth, with surplus points. Everyone else is going to end up suffering. Well, dwarves to some extent, if they have the final research tree, but you're not going to take over Bretonnia as dwarves. It's a waste of time. But yeah, it's one of those bad dynamics of a campaign map. It's also these kind of small areas that you then end up having. That's one of the problems, like certain areas, like Ulthuan and the Empire, and much of Cathay, but not the Great Bastion, are wide enough, spaced enough. But then you have these areas like Bretonnia, you have Kislev specifically, which are just very, very concentrated. Either you have too few settlements but too many provinces in Bretonnia, or you have few provinces with certain settlements, but you have way too many legendary lords in Kislev. So the balancing of it doesn't work. And yes, this is where Crave Assembly could improve. Now, of course, how they should improve it is its own discussion. There are various possibilities with regards to this. So what is one solution? Well, if we look at the old world campaign mod, we can see what the engine can handle. Like, there's a lot of factions, a lot of regions, a lot of distance. The point in me showing this is to showcase the capabilities, and there's a lot of wasted space here, like everything that's happening in the realms of chaos that are in the corner. But if you want to look at the biggest Total War map by far, it is this one. And it's this one not just because of the sheer number of factions, it's this one because of the sheer size of it. Now, of course, there's trade-off, details in various corners, terrain, etc., but this wasn't made by a development team. This wasn't made by 20 people working on a game. This was made by a couple of people, especially Chaos Robbie. So obviously the tools to do this, that's a different discussion, but suffice to say, it does show the capabilities the engine can have. Now, Immortal Empires does not need something this gigantic. It's not balanced around it, but imagine if they kept the settlement density of Immortal Empires, but then doubled the size of each region, double the size of Ulthuan, Kislev, etc. That could be an idea. But what about 10 turn timers? Well, you either deal with it, or what Creative Assembly could do, and should do, honestly, even in the current Immortal Empires map, is just allow players to disable certain areas. Like, for instance, if I'm playing a campaign as Ulthuan, or say Malachi, let's go with Malachi. If I'm playing a campaign as Malachi, do I really care what happens in Lustria? Like, seriously? It's like, can I just disable that entire section of the game? Because I don't care about it. Also, Cathay, like, Lustria and Cathay, completely remove them. That would increase my performance. Means I have to wait less time for factions that I do not care about whatsoever. Just make those areas impassable, make them untouchable. Just let me engage with the areas that I care about. So the areas you'd care about as a dwarf would be places like Nagrand, would be places like Ulthuan. But you could disable multiple areas. Just allow people to engage in those areas. Double size, allow people to disable areas. They could also just make DLCs. Medieval 2 Kingdoms had DLCs where they focused on specific areas like the Holy Land, Jerusalem, then you had England, various things, right? The Baltics, and then, of course, the Aztecs, the New World. So they had DLCs where they put greater focus on certain areas of the map. The engine can handle it. In fact, the idea of disabling parts of the campaign map is something mods do for Warhammer 3. If you want to play this, one of the mods you should use is actually one that kills distant minor factions so you can improve the performance. The argument that you can't disable certain areas or cut them off, the engine can handle it. Mods can handle it. Some people, a lot of this is not difficult, boys and girls. It just would require Creative Assembly to actually care about various things instead of still using a compromise map that was rushed out to get Immortal Empires as quickly as possible. That is the consequence of what happened in 2022. And we're still paying the price for it. So I know that CA probably doesn't want to keep supporting Warhammer 3 for much longer. Of course, one argument people will give, well, they did a mini campaign map for Wood Elves and Beastmen. Yeah, I'm also going to stress out why people didn't play those, because Beastmen sucked in Warhammer 1, and so did Wood Elves. Let's not mince words. They've done plenty of smaller DLCs. Age of Charlemagne, Belisarius, Justinian, for instance, just some examples, Caesar and Gaul, Hannibal at the Gates. Those were not bad DLCs. And they certainly were played. I didn't play the Wood Elves, but I played Hannibal at the Gates. I did play Caesar and Gaul. And it wasn't the map that I had an issue with. It was more so the issues of Rome 2 or Attila that caused it. Like, I enjoyed the Age of Charlemagne, for instance. But that's just a perspective. Kosin signing out.